All right, continuing our study of Genesis. Today, our goal is to cover chapters 20 and 21. Remember where we left off last time? We had the account of God coming to Abraham and basically saying, shall I reveal or shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do? And God says, no, I'm going to tell Abraham what I'm about to do. So God says, Sodom and Gomorrah are two wicked cities, and I'm going to destroy them. And what was Abraham's response?
Well, he tried to cut a deal with him.
He did. He sure did. And why did he try to cut a deal with him?
Well, he was thinking of his family.
That's right. That's right. His nephew Lot and Lot's wife and their two daughters were there. Lot and his wife and their kids had made their home there. So when God said he's going to destroy those cities, Abraham's thinking, oh no, this is my extended family. And so Abraham tried to cut a deal with him. He starts off by saying, God, what if there were 50 righteous people there in Sodom and Gomorrah? Would you destroy the city for 50? And God says, no. And so then Abraham's thinking, well, okay, I'm not 50 there. What if we're only 5 short? What if there were 45 there? God says, all right. And Abraham says, how about 40? And he works him on down until he gets how far?
10.
To 10. He says, if there are 10 righteous people there, will you destroy it? God says, no. And for some reason, Abraham stops right there. But he could have kept on going, because if he had gotten all the way down to 1, what would have been the answer? No, there's nobody righteous there. But again, as we discussed last time, this bargaining process, this intercession by Abraham on behalf of the sinful cities is really a foreshadowing of Christ, because we know that it's only on the account of one righteous one, Jesus himself, that anybody has ever been saved or anybody ever will be saved. And so again, we have another foreshadowing. But the interesting thing, we see that sure enough, God allows for the escape of Lot and his wife temporarily, and his two daughters. Lot's wife looks back. The scripture says she looks back, but she looks back in a longing way. That is to say that she has not severed her connection with it, and because she remains connected with Sodom and Gomorrah, she's turned into a pillar of salt right there.
I wonder why it was a pillar of salt.
That's a good question. Except,
I know that salt is used to preserve
yeah.
and to taste, as far as the natural way. But I've often wondered out there why a pillar of salt.
The only thing I can figure is there's a lot of salt in that region. It was right there by the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea is just comprised almost entirely of salt. In fact, there's a geological formation that's there to this very day that they call Lot's Wife. It's a pillar of it's a salt encrusted something or other. I don't think it's actually the Lot's wife, but that's what they refer to it as. Could be the spot where it happened. But that's a good question, Tommy. I don't know.
I had a reference to Luke 17:32 and 33. It says, remember Lot's wife. Whoever tries to keep his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life will preserve it.
Preserve. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The idea, whoever loses, she didn't, the idea there is losing your life is to lose your life in Christ, so you're losing your earthly life. Well, if there's a preservation there, it's the preservation of just, total desolation. I think that's what the salt represented, just, total desolation. There was nothing living left within her. But that's a good question, Tommy. Put that on your list of things to ask St. Peter when you get to the gate.
Had they already, that's where Lot chose to go with, when they got into trouble and
Well, when the servants were fighting,
yeah,
they had to split
with
up.
all the animals and everything else. So Abraham might have been thinking, oh man, if something happens that he's going to come, I'll have to start him over again.
Yeah. Well, Abraham had already said, all right, what Lot chose the rich Jordan Valley. It was probably the best place. You go to Israel today, and between the Jezreel Valley and the Jordan Valley, those are two of the richest, best looking places in the entire country.
But if it was going to be destroyed, he's going to have to, if Lot was going to be, saved, he'd have to start him over again.
Yeah. After the cities were destroyed. But that, you raise an interesting point here, because one of the things that I was wondering about, as I read chapter 20, you know, and we're going to read it. What does it show you? That Abraham is ascending and he's developing, he's becoming more spiritual? No. I mean, he's backsliding. You know, I read chapter 20 and I thought, Abraham, are you know, do you have attention deficit disorder? What's wrong with you, guy? So let's read chapter 20 and let's try to figure out what's going on here and why this happened the way it did. Kenny, would you start us out? Chapter 20.
Now Abraham moved on from there into the region of Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her.
Pause right there just a second. All right, let's get. Well, first off, what is this sounding like?
Sounded like the same thing when they went to Egypt.
It sounds like the exact same thing. Now, I didn't get as far as Egypt, but you know where he went? You know where this is? Between Kadesh and Shur, also called Gerar. We don't know exactly, but it appears to be right in what is now called the Gaza Strip, the area where the Philistines were headquartered. Okay, and in fact, we'll learn later on that Abimelech is a Philistine. The name Abimelech actually means my father is king. So it's a declaration that one is a prince, but they call him Abimelech. He's the king of Gerar. And so for some reason, you know, and that's the question. Here is Abraham. And we know what's happened to him so far. We know that God has come to visit him. God, in the form of a man, came to visit him along with two angels. Mm-hmm. Abraham recognized who they were. He prepared a meal for them. God revealed who he was. He says, you know, obviously God knew where Sarah was, but he says, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" He knew that her name had been changed from Sarai to Sarah. And so when he was asking where she was, it was not a question where she was physically, it was where she was spiritually. Is she ready to fulfill the plan that I have for her life? And of course at that point she wasn't, because when the Lord declared that he would come back and visit Sarah a year from now and she would have a baby, what did Sarah do?
She laughed.
She laughed. And not only did she laugh, when she was confronted, God said, "Why'd you laugh?" What did Sarah say?
I didn't laugh.
"I didn't laugh." And God said, "Oh yes, you did laugh." And I think that was the chastening moment for Sarah. I think she had quite an experience there. And I think that was a mountaintop experience for her. I think that was the beginning of her spirituality. Not that Sarah had done as much wrong as Abraham had done up to that point in time. I think for the most part, other than her suggestion that Abraham get together with her Egyptian slave girl, you know, Sarah's doing a pretty good job of walking down the right path.
What is her age at this point?
Sarah,
She's 90.
she's about 90 years old at this point in time.
Good looking, foxy 90-year-old.
Yeah, you know. And in fact, Jackie was reading this last night. She said, "You think chapter 20?"
She dyed her hair.
Yeah, got some of that soot from Sodom and Gomorrah and dyed her hair. Jackie asked me last night. She said, when she read it, she said, "Do you think this is chronologically out of order?" I said, "I don't think so." She said, "Well, you know, why would this king be taking a second look at this 90-year-old woman?" I think the answer is that I think God made her beautiful. I think God, you know, she always had something about her that was very attractive. But I think in her pregnancy, and she's pregnant about this time, that God revealed her to be just a very, you know, physically beautiful woman. She was despite her advanced age, she was very beautiful to everybody at that time. But the question is, the larger question is, why is Abraham doing the same thing he did before that got him into trouble when he went down to Egypt? Why is he doing this here?
It might work this
Like a
time.
faith.
Well, what might work? What was he trying to do?
Save himself.
I think you're onto it. Abraham, Mark. Let's look at this. a little more deeply, and this struck me this morning as I was studying. Why did Abraham do this? Well, first off, one of the things that we have to understand is these stories that we read about Abraham are really not about Abraham's walk with God, because he didn't do a very good job of that, did he? What these are accounts of God using Abraham and Sarah to accomplish his purposes. Okay? And so, again, the New Testament refers to Abraham as the father of our faith, and sure enough, he was a good man, but the Old Testament gives us the unvarnished version of his life, and he did a lot of things wrong. He did a lot of things that we would say are stupid. Now, does that mean that we wouldn't do them if we were in the same position? Not saying that at all, but with the benefit of history and hindsight, we can see, Abraham, you made a lot of mistakes. So what's going on here? Well, one of the things that may be going on here, and one of the things that comes up if we look at verse 10, when Abimelech scolds Abraham, he says, "What have you encountered, or what have you seen that you have done such a thing?" We think about, what is it that Abraham has seen and seen recently that might cause him to do such a thing as he's done here? What did he see? He just saw fire and brimstone rain down from heaven and destroy two powerful cities. Now, the other thing we have to think about is whether or not Abraham knew that Lot and his family escaped. We don't know that. Because there's no account later on in the scriptures of there being a family reunion where Abraham and Lot got together and said, "Oh, it's a great thing, Lot, that you escaped from Sodom and Gomorrah. How'd you do it? What was it like?" No. As far as we know, Abraham doesn't know that Lot and his family escaped. So Abraham may be thinking, uh-oh, this God is not the God that I thought he was. He rained down fire and brimstone and he killed my family, along with a bunch of other wicked people in Sodom and Gomorrah. So it could very well be that one of two things, that either Abraham is fearful of God, that he's going to rain down fire and brimstone on himself, so he's trying to clear out and hide, or he is running from God because he is angry with God. He's angry with God for killing his family and destroying these two cities. So, could be it again. Neither one of those would justify Abraham's actions, does it?
No.
But perhaps we can understand a little bit better, and perhaps we can see, well, if I'd have been in Abraham's shoes, I might have done the same thing. But, again, in retrospect, we can see that what he did, he was kind of a stupid thing. So anyway, he goes wandering. He doesn't go down to Egypt, but he goes about as far as he can in the land of Canaan without getting to Egypt. So he winds up over in the home of the Philistines. He encounters this guy, the king, named Abimelech. And what does he say about Sarah?
She's
He
my
said,
sister.
"This is my sister. This good-looking woman right here is my sister." So you think, Abraham, what in the world is wrong with you? Read on, Kim.
But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not gone near her. So he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, 'She is my sister'? And didn't she also say, 'He is my brother'? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands." Then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know you did this with a clear conscience. And so I have kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet. And he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all yours will die."
Pause right there. As far as I can recall, this is the first reference in the scripture to prayer. You see that in verse 7? It says, "Therefore, restore the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live." And we're going to see over there in verse 17, it says, "And Abraham prayed to God." As far as I know, there's no reference prior to this time to any prayer. So this is a new thing that's introduced to us here, prayer, and it's intercessory prayer. Now we know that Abraham, as Tommy pointed out, Abraham interceded before God for Sodom and Gomorrah and for Lot and his family, but it was like a face-to-face dealing. But nevertheless, here we have it. Okay, let's read on. Verse 9. I'm sorry, verse 8.
Early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials, and when he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said, "What have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that you should not be done." And Abimelech asked Abraham, "What was your reason for doing this?" Abraham replied, "I said to myself, this is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the sister of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere you go, say of me, he is my brother."
I'll pause right there. Okay. So we see in the beginning that Sarah was a part of this, because Sarah herself said, yeah, you know, if you're asked, Abraham instructed her, if you're asked, say that, yeah, Abraham is my brother. So, but we can see here the reason why they're doing this. And why is it? Because Abraham is afraid that somebody's going to kill him because he's married to this beautiful woman who some other king is lusting after. And even at that time, even in these pagan nations, it was a sinful thing. Adultery was considered to be a sinful thing, unlike America today, where it's almost commonly accepted. But back then, yeah, even the pagan nations honored the husband and wife relationship. And so even a pagan king would not take the wife of a woman who was married. However, that wouldn't prevent the king from making her a widow.
Yeah.
By killing her husband, and then after he was dead, then it was perfectly legitimate. Now, kind of twisted logic, but that's the way they were thinking then. So the reason that Abraham concocted this story and Sarah went along with it was what? For the protection of Abraham. But they say, well, all right, well, as Tommy pointed out last time, I'm not really telling a total lie because she is my sister. She's only my half sister, but you know, it becomes half a lie when they omit the truth that they are husband and wife. Now, I'll submit to you that there's something else going on here. This is not just Abraham perhaps being mad at God or being fearful of God and running from him. I think this is one last attempt of Satan to pollute the womb of Sarah.
Yes.
Just like it's happened. That's right. Just like it's happened in Egypt. Because we know that Satan has always been very active in this world, and Satan has always been about doing what? In the Old Testament, he was about evil. That's right. And destroying the lineage of Christ, right? God has made a promise that Abraham and Sarah would bear a son who would be the son of promise and who would begin the line, if you will, towards the Messiah. That Sarah would be the beginning of the womb of the Messiah, and so Satan is all about trying to pollute her womb. And I think, you know, Satan himself may have had a hand in making Sarah beautiful to this king, Abimelech, whether it was actually her physical beauty which God had bestowed on her, or whether Satan had put some sort of illusion in the mind of Abimelech. There was an attraction there, and it was an attraction for an evil purpose. And so I believe that Satan was behind it. But what happened? God steps right in, and God is very diligent to protect and preserve Sarah, particularly in the condition that she's in right there, because at this point in time she may have been with child.
She was not.
Or she was not, okay.
No, because in verse 21 it says that she became pregnant.
Okay.
Chapter 21, but not.
But she's very close to the time.
Right.
And it would have been it would have been Satan's purpose to pollute her womb so that she could not bear the child who would become the progenitor of Christ himself. Okay, where do we leave off? Wanda, you want to pick up? I think we're at verse 14.
Okay. Then Abimelech brought sheep and cattle and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham, and he returned Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, my land is before you, live wherever you like. To Sarah he said, I'm giving your brother 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You were completely vindicated.
Pause right there just a second. Remember, you see how Abimelech makes one last little jab at Abraham? He says, and to Sarah he said, behold, I've given your brother, right? not your husband. I've given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is for your vindication. And what does he mean by that? Abraham has wronged you big time, gal. And I'm giving this.
Freedom?
What's that?
Did he buy her freedom?
Not so much buying her freedom, but it was a sign of her innocence. I believe it was to be an indication so that everybody would know that that she is clear, that she is without guilt in this, and it is on account of her brother that came about
I
at
was
all.
thinking when you said she had a good walk with Christ, she married a brother, a half brother.
Yeah.
But she
So this
agreed
is what
that she
cleared it.
was as much at fault as Abraham on this here, because she went
She-
right along with it.
She may not have had much say-so because women were not treated very well in that day and
Yeah.
time and not thought of very highly. And she called Abraham her master,
Yeah.
according to scripture, so she was very submissive to him.
Yeah. She was duty bound to follow him, and again, Abraham had no business going over to the land of the Philistines. They've always been pagans, but he went over there, and as was the custom of the time, if a large band of people moved into the territory of another, if you wanted to make a peace treaty, then what would happen is the one who moved in would offer one of his close relatives, basically the one of the king's choice, to be the wife. I mean, they did that even in medieval times. We know that King Henry VIII married the daughter of King Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. Why? For purposes of unity. And this started back then. And so Abraham knew that if he went into the land of a sovereign, that he would have to offer up a beautiful woman of his group to be her wife. And, Sarah was the one, and so he was complicit in it. And as one said, I don't know that she had a whole lot of choice about it. She had to be obedient to her husband and follow him over there. She got caught in the trap. Now, she could have protested. She could have said, no, this guy's my husband, don't do it. But Abraham wouldn't let her. Why? Because he was a chicken. Right?
Let me ask you a question. In the Old Testament days, that Abraham married his half sister and everything, that wasn't thought of as being bad, correct?
That's correct.
All right, now, when did it change in the Bible to this day and time, if a person was to marry his half sister, that would be out of the unheard of,
Yeah.
and everything. When did it change and what and everything?
I think the big change occurred at the time of the wilderness wanderings, after they were freed from slavery in Egypt and they were in the wilderness, and God gave them the 10 Commandments, but also all the Levitical laws that forbade them from marrying their sister. If you look through the Levitical laws, that's where it comes up explicitly. Now, I think there was a degree of leniency before that, as obviously there must have been, because when you start off with Adam and Eve, they're going to have children, and if there's going to be procreation of the earth, you got to be marrying your sister, and you got to be marrying your cousins and whatever. So that happened for a period of time. So to answer your question, it's best, unless y'all remember something different, I think it was the Levitical laws that first laid down the rules that that a man shall not marry his sister. Even a half sister was forbidden under the Levitical
Is
law.
that said in the Bible then?
It is.
Yeah.
If you look at the book of Leviticus, if you look at the time that God was giving the 10 Commandments and all of the other laws that would apply to the children of Israel, that's when those laws became explicit. But before that, I don't know that it's explicitly forbidden.
I don't think
I don't
so.
think it is. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah,
At the time of Moses
I would like to know.
and the wilderness wanderings, if you want to, I'll look it up and I'll find it for you, because it is forbidden in the Levitical
Okay,
laws.
okay.
Yeah.
Before that, a lot of things wasn't forbidden.
Right, that's right.
Right.
But they were still
You
doing
know,
it later years in England,
because they weren't under the law.
marrying within the family.
And God hadn't really, he just let them kind of go, see what was going to happen. And, well, he knew, but he let them go, and then he had to bring the 10 Commandments in to rein them in.
All All right, 17 and 18, Wanda.
Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his slave girls, so they could have children again. For the Lord had closed up every womb in Abimelech's household because of Abraham's wife, Sarah.
Now, that's a heck of a note here. Here, Abraham is doing something that is contrary to God. He takes Sarah and his family, and they're basically running away from God. And they wind up over in the land of the Philistines. The king sees a beautiful woman, wants to take her for his wife, take her into his harem, so to speak. Abraham says, it's okay with me. Sarah doesn't resist. And the guy does some inquiry in the first place. He knew that they're sister and brother. They're not husband and wife. But then God appears to him in a dream and says, don't you dare touch her, because as soon as you do, you're a dead man. But not only that, just because of this encounter, God had closed up the wombs of all of the women in Philistia as a warning, if you will. Wow. You think God is not about protecting his people, protecting his plan? Again, remember, this is not about Abraham and Sarah's walk with God. This is about God choosing and using Abraham and Sarah to accomplish his purposes in his ways, despite their stupidity and despite their disobedience.
He wanted it to be a pure lineage.
That's right.
So that's what he kept telling them afterwards,
And
I think it gives us hope.
it does. It does. It gives us hope. It really,
Because no
it really
matter how
does.
bad we mess up,
He still uses
he
us.
still uses us for his purposes.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And one of the things that you ask is, gosh, why did God wait until Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90 years old to give him a son? Well, there's many reasons. One of which was to do that which was impossible just because of their age. But another thing is, you can see that even at this advanced age, that Abraham and Sarah were not walking with God yet the way God wanted them to, right? Abraham he's fearful of God in a wrong way. He's running from God. He's perhaps resentful of God. He's not in the kind of relationship with God that God wants him to be in order to be the father of a great nation. You see, even in chapter 20, he is still all about doing things that are inspired by his own fear.
He doesn't see the big picture that God has already told him.
That's right. That's right.
Didn't you
He's already
say,
been confronted and told by God, this is what I'm going to do with you and your families.
Yeah. Now, to his credit, when God told Abraham something, Abraham believed it
Right.
for a short period of time. But at least it was for a while. So what God is all about doing is expanding the period of time that message will stay with Abraham, just like he does with all of us.
did you say that he made idols?
Yes, Abraham was an idol maker in Ur of the Chaldeans. He was an idol worshiper, and according to the Jewish Targums, he and his family were makers of idols. That's right.
Oh, I'll ask you later. On Facebook, I forget exactly, it was about, about Jesus, and I think it was a woman said that Jesus can't be true because there's no writing outside of the Bible about Jesus,
Well, yeah, there is.
Or-
Yeah, there is.
But, this is probably a young person, and the other day, it was on the radio, they talked about how today that history doesn't mean anything to young people. All they want to do is look ahead and that they don't.
What's in the now?
Yeah.
All right, chapter 21. Terry, you want to read for us?
Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised Sarah.
Pause right there just a second. Earlier it was said that God was going to come back and visit Sarah. And depending upon how you translate those words, it in some translations says, and then God came to Sarah. So he does come back and my translation says he took note of her. What does yours say, Terry?
He was gracious to Sarah.
He was gracious to her. Some translations say that he came to visit her using the same words that were promised. But anyway, God comes to Sarah and he's gracious to her, and he comes for the purpose of fulfilling his promise. So read on. Verse 2.
Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would curse children? Yet I have
Nurse children.
Pardon?
Nurse. Right.
Oh, okay, would nurse children. Yet I have borne him a son in his old age.
She probably did some cursing of children too. That's all mothers have. Anyway, nurse children, that's right. Read on.
The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking, and she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. But God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned.
Pause right there. A lot is said in these few verses that Terry just read to us. First off, it says in verse 8, they have a big celebration on the day that Isaac was weaned. Now, he probably would have been somewhere between 3, 4, 5 years old. Children were, back in those days, they weren't weaned until they were, of a more significant age. But anyway, they have a big party. And then it says in verse 9, and Sarah saw that the son of Hagar, that is Ishmael, whom she had borne to Abraham, was mocking Isaac. In other translations, it says that he was persecuting Isaac. And the word persecution connotes a desire to kill or a desire to murder. So what is revealed here is that Ishmael had a desire to do harm to Isaac. And according to the Jewish Targums, what was going on is Ishmael, who was about 13 years older than little Isaac at the time. Isaac would have been a toddler, 3 or 4 or 5 years old. Ishmael would have been maybe 18, something like that. That according to the Jewish tradition, Ishmael is shooting arrows, and he's telling Isaac to go out and fetch his arrows. And the idea is that he's going to let one of those arrows loose, and he's going to wind up just, right in the body of Isaac, and is going to kill him. So Sarah sees what's going on, and Sarah said to Abraham, drive out this maid and her son, for the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son Isaac. And then Abraham is distressed by that. Why? Well, he loves Ishmael. He really does. He's interceded to God on Ishmael's behalf before, so he doesn't want to send the son away. But then God says what?
Listen to Sarah.
He says, listen to Sarah. And what does that tell us? Sarah is the one whose mistake led to the birth of Ishmael in the first place. Mm-hmm. And Abraham never should have listened to her before. But now God is saying, listen to Sarah. Why is that?
Because he didn't want to listen to Sarah now.
He didn't want to, that's right. But I think this also tells us there's been a great change that has come about in Sarah after she's been rebuked by God when she said, I wasn't laughing. He said, oh yes, you were. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to be pregnant, and you're going to bear a child 1 year from now, and I'm going to come back and see you. I think that was, again, a real moment of change for Sarah.
I have a footnote too that says that Isaac's name means he laughs.
Yeah, he laughs, yeah. And you remember when God first told Abraham about Isaac, that it would be his son, he laughed. Mm-hmm. And then when Sarah heard, she laughed. And so the idea is that when everybody hears the story of Isaac, they're going to laugh. Why? Because it's an incongruity. How can a child be born to a man who's 100 and a woman who's 90 years old? So anyway, So what happens? Ishmael and Hagar are in fact sent away. We don't need to read that. But you know what Paul tells us is that there's great allegory in this, and I don't want to miss the allegory, the spiritual symbolism here, because Hagar, we're told in Galatians chapter 4, represents the covenant of the law. And Ishmael represents all of those who are of the works of the law, i.e. they're the son of the works of the flesh and self-reliance. In contrast to Isaac, who is the son of promise or reliance upon God. And we see here a repetition of the theme of circumcision. The whole idea of circumcision, as Paul explained to us later on, we are the true circumcision who worship in the Spirit of God and glory in Christ Jesus and put no confidence in the flesh. That's what circumcision is all about. Ishmael represents the opposite of that. Ishmael represents reliance upon the flesh. Isaac represents reliance upon the promises of God. Hagar represents what would come later on to be called the Mosaic covenant, that is the law, that is compliance with the law, whereas Isaac represents the Abrahamic covenant, which is more in the nature of the new covenant. And so the idea here, the spiritual significance of this, you say it's a harsh and cruel thing that Abraham would cast out the bondwoman and would cast out the son of the flesh, but what God is telling us here is that is what we must all do. We must all cast off the covenant of the law, and that is the thought prospect that by obeying the law or by doing something, we can come into a right relationship with God. The way we come into a right relationship with God is not on account of Ishmael or the works of the flesh. It is on account of Isaac, that is, trusting and believing in the promise. So there's a great spiritual allegory, great spiritual significance in what we read right here. Okay, we're out of time. Next time we're going to study chapter 2, which in my view is one of the most significant chapters in all the Old Testament. This is about the offering of Isaac on the mountain.
2 or
20.
Chapter 22. But what I want you to think about before we get into chapter 22, I want you to read chapter 22, and when you read chapter 22, I want you to notice all the parallels there between the sacrificing of Isaac and the sacrificing of Christ, and what happened on Calvary 2,000 years later. But also want you to think about what led up to it, and when you read starting in chapter 21, verse 22 through the end, Abraham has another encounter with Abimelech, and he makes a covenant with him. And so I want you to think about what leads up to it, and then we're going to explore in great detail the significance of chapter 22.